The small house at the edge of Greenwood Village never quite felt like home to Maya. At 17, she had grown used to the tension that filled the rooms like a heavy fog. The wooden floors creaked under her careful steps as she moved about, trying to make herself invisible whenever her stepfather Raymond was around. Maya's mother, Leela, had married Raymond 5 years ago. Back then, he seemed kind and caring, but things changed after the wedding. Raymond's smile disappeared, replaced by a permanent frown that deepened each time his eyes landed on Maya. "That girl eats too much," he would mutter to Leela when he thought Maya couldn't hear. "We barely have enough for ourselves." The walls of their home were thin. Maya heard everything. Life became harder when Leela fell sick 3 months ago. The doctor in the village clinic said it was tuberculosis. She needed expensive medicine and rest, but Raymond complained about every coin spent on her treatment. "We can't afford this," he would say, pacing the small living room. "Where am I supposed to get this money?" Maya took on more work. After school, she cleaned houses in the richer part of the village. On weekends, she sold vegetables at the market. Every penny she earned went to her mother's medicine. Still, it wasn't enough. One evening, as Maya returned from her cleaning job, she noticed an expensive black car parked outside their house. Such cars were rare in their village. Most people used old bicycles or motorbikes that sputtered black smoke. Inside, she found Raymond sitting with a stranger, an older man in an expensive suit. His hair was gray, and deep wrinkles lined his face. Maya guessed he was at least 60. When she entered, both men turned to look at her. The stranger's eyes moved slowly from her face down to her feet, then back up again. His smile made her skin crawl. "Ah, this must be Maya," the man said, standing up. "She is even prettier than you described." Raymond nodded, a strange smile on his face. "Maya, meet Mr. Chen. He owns many businesses in the city." Maya bowed slightly, confused about why such a wealthy man would visit their humble home. She hurried to the kitchen to prepare tea, feeling Mr. Chen's eyes follow her. Through the thin kitchen wall, she could hear their conversation. "She is perfect," Mr. Chen said. "Young, beautiful, and from what you tell me, hardworking. I will pay the amount we discussed." "Good," Raymond replied. "When can you take her?" Maya's hands froze on the teacups. "Take her? What were they talking about?" "Next week," Mr. Chen said. "I'll bring the money then. Tell her she is coming to work as a housekeeper in my mansion. That will make the transition easier." Raymond laughed softly. "Don't worry, she'll do whatever I say. Her mother is too sick to object." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. The teacups rattled in her shaking hands. She was being sold. Her own stepfather was selling her to this old man. That night, Maya cried silently into her pillow. Her mother slept in the next room, unaware of Raymond's plan. Maya knew Leela was too weak to fight Raymond, and telling her would only cause her more pain. Maya had 1 week to figure out what to do. 1 week before Mr. Chen returned to take her away. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. For the next 7 days, Maya watched the clock with dread. Each tick brought her closer to a future she didn't choose. She tried to think of a way out, but every plan seemed impossible. With no money and her mother too sick to travel, where could they go? On the third day, Maya gathered her courage and spoke to her mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said, sitting on the edge of Leela's bed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room. Leela's face was thin and pale, but her eyes brightened at her daughter's voice. "What is it, my dear?" "Raymond. He made a deal with a rich man. This man wants to take me to the city." Maya's voice trembled. Before she could continue, Raymond appeared at the doorway, his shadow falling across them both. "I see you told your mother about the good news," he said with a false smile. He entered the room and sat beside Leela, taking her hand. "My dear, I've found a wonderful opportunity for Maya. Mr. Chen, a respected businessman, needs a housekeeper for his mansion in the city. He will pay her well and provide a room, food, everything." Maya opened her mouth to protest, but Raymond shot her a warning look. "But she's just 17, Leela said weakly. "And her education?" "Mr. Chen has promised she can continue her studies in the city. Better schools there, you know." Raymond patted Leela's hand. "Think of it, my dear. With the money she sends home, we can afford your treatment. You'll get better, and Maya will have a bright future." Maya wanted to scream that it was all lies, but the hope in her mother's eyes stopped her. For the first time in months, Leela looked hopeful. Is this true, Maya? Do you want this job? Leela asked. With Raymond staring at her, Maya forced a smile. Yes, Mom, it's a good opportunity. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. That night, Raymond cornered Maya in the kitchen. Don't ruin this for us, he hissed, his face inches from hers. Mr. Chen is paying good money. If you tell your mother the truth, I'll stop buying her medicine. Understand? Maya understood perfectly. Her mother's life was being used against her. The dreaded day arrived faster than Maya expected. She packed her few belongings in a small bag, 2 dresses, a photo of her mother, her school books, and a small knife she had hidden inside a sock. She didn't know if the knife would help, but it made her feel less helpless. Mr. Chen arrived in his black car just after sunrise. Raymond was all smiles, helping load Maya's bag into the trunk. Neighbors watched curiously from their windows. Leah, still weak but determined, stood at the door to say goodbye. Be good, work hard, and write to me, she told Maya, hugging her tightly. I'm so proud of you for helping our family. I love you, Mom, Maya whispered, breathing in her mother's familiar scent of jasmine and medicine. She wondered if she would ever see her again. Mr. Chen handed Raymond an envelope thick with cash. Raymond counted it quickly before tucking it into his pocket. She's all yours, Raymond said with a nod. A good worker, this one. Mr. Chen smiled at Maya, but his eyes remained cold. Time to go, my dear. Your new life awaits. As the car pulled away, Maya looked back at her mother waving from the doorway, Raymond's arm around her shoulders. Through the rear window, she saw Raymond's fake smile drop the moment Leela wasn't looking. The car turned the corner, and Maya's home disappeared from view. She was alone now, heading toward an unknown fate with a man who had bought her like property. Don't worry, Mr. Chen said, noticing her tears. You'll like your new home. Very beautiful, very big. His hand moved to rest on her knee. Maya shifted away, pressing herself against the car door. She clutched her bag tightly, feeling the outline of the hidden knife. Whatever happened next, she would not go down without a fight. The car journey lasted 3 hours. Maya watched through the window as dusty village roads gave way to busy highways, then to wide city streets lined with tall buildings. She had never been to the city before. Under different circumstances, she might have been excited. Mr. Chen barely spoke during the drive. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks, my factory or my office building. Each statement a reminder of his wealth and power. Maya responded with silent nods, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. Finally, the car turned down a tree-lined private road and stopped before large iron gates. A security guard stepped out of a small booth, bowed to Mr. Chen, and opened the gates. The car continued up a long driveway. Maya's eyes widened at the sight of Mr. Chen's home. It wasn't just a house. It was a mansion that looked like a palace from the storybooks her mother used to read to her. 3 stories tall with gleaming white walls, tall windows, and a garden so large she couldn't see where it ended. Welcome to your new home, Mr. Chen said, his voice proud. Impressive, yes. The driver opened the car door. Maya stepped out, clutching her small bag against her chest like a shield. A middle-aged woman in a neat uniform waited at the mansion's entrance. Her face was stern but not unkind. This is Mrs. Lin, my housekeeper, Mr. Chen explained. She will show you to your room and explain your duties. Mrs. Lin bowed slightly. Please follow me. Maya followed Mrs. Lin through a massive entryway with marble floors and a crystal chandelier hanging overhead. They climbed a wide staircase to the 2nd floor, then walked down a long hallway with many doors. Mrs. Lin stopped at the last door and opened it. This is your room. Maya stepped inside and gasped. The room was larger than her entire house back home. A big bed with silk sheets stood against one wall. There was a wardrobe, a desk, and even a small sofa near a window that overlooked the garden. Your bathroom is through there, Mrs. Lin said, pointing to another door. Mr. Chen has provided new clothes for you in the wardrobe. Maya set her bag on the bed. When do I start my housekeeping duties? Mrs. Lin gave her an odd look. Housekeeping duties? Yes, Mr. Chen hired me as a housekeeper, Maya explained. Mrs. Lin's expression changed to one of pity. Oh, child, is that what they told you? A cold feeling spread through Maya's chest. What do you mean? Why am I here? Mrs. Lin sighed. Mr. Chen has been looking for a young wife. His first wife died 2 years ago. The room seemed to spin around Maya. Wife? But I'm only 17. I never agreed to this. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lin said quietly. Mr. Chen expects you to join him for dinner tonight. Be ready at 7. She stepped toward the door. One more thing. All doors and windows are connected to an alarm system. The gates are always guarded. For your own good, don't try to leave. After Mrs. Lin left, Maya ran to the door. It was locked from the outside. She rushed to the window and tried to open it, but it only opened a few inches before stopping. Looking down, she saw it was too high to jump safely. Maya sank onto the bed, tears streaming down her face. This beautiful room was nothing but a prison cell. She opened her bag and took out the small knife she had hidden. It seemed useless now against locked doors and guards. Then she noticed a notebook among her school books. She pulled it out along with a pen. If she couldn't escape today, she would watch and wait. She would document everything and find a way out. Someone in this big house might help her. There had to be a way. Maya opened the notebook to the first blank page and began to write. Day 1 in Mr. Chen's mansion. I am not a housekeeper. I have been sold as a bride, but I will not give up. Somehow, I will escape and expose what my stepfather and Mr. Chen have done. For 3 days, Maya lived in a daze. Each evening, she was forced to join Mr. Chen for dinner, wearing the expensive dresses he provided. He spoke to her as if they were already married, discussing plans for their future together. Maya answered with as few words as possible, pushing food around her plate without eating much. During the day, she was allowed to walk in the garden, but always under the watchful eyes of security cameras and guards. She filled pages of her notebook with observations about the house layout, guard schedules, and possible escape routes. But each plan she thought of had fatal flaws. On the morning of the 4th day, Maya woke to unusual sounds in the mansion, raised voices, hurried footsteps, doors opening and closing. Something was happening. Mrs. Lin arrived with her breakfast tray, looking flustered. What's going on? Maya asked, taking the tray. Mrs. Lin glanced over her shoulder before answering in a low voice. Mr. Chen's son has returned from America. He wasn't expected for another month. Mr. Chen has a son. This was the first Maya had heard of him. Yes, Lai Wei. He's been studying business at an American university. Mrs. Lin straightened Maya's bed covers nervously. He and his father, they don't always get along. After Mrs. Lin left, Maya ate her breakfast quickly. This might be important. A family argument could create a distraction she could use. Around noon, Maya was sitting by her window when her door suddenly opened. Instead of Mrs. Lin or Mr. Chen, a young man stood in the doorway. He was tall and lean, dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt, very different from Mr. Chen's formal suits. He looked about 25, with short black hair and tired eyes that widened when he saw Maya. Who are you? He asked in a confused voice. Maya stood up, her heart racing. This had to be Lai Wei. I'm Maya. Your father brought me here. Lai Wei stepped into the room, looking around at the locked windows and the keyhole on the outside of the door. His face darkened with understanding. Let me guess, he told your family you would work as a housekeeper? His voice was bitter. Maya nodded, hope rising in her chest. Lai Wei didn't seem happy about the situation. How old are you? He asked. 17. Lai Wei cursed under his breath. This is wrong. This is illegal. He ran a hand through his hair. I just got back from 5 years in America. I thought my father might have changed, but he's worse than ever. Can you help me? Maya asked quietly, afraid to hope too much. Lai Wei looked at her for a long moment. What's your full story? How did you end up here? Maya told him everything, about her mother's illness, her stepfather's deal with Mr. Chen, the threats, the lies, and her forced journey to the mansion. Lai Wei listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat down heavily on the edge of the sofa. My father is planning a wedding next month, he said. He told me this morning that he's getting married again, to help him in his old age. Lai Wei's laugh was without humor. He didn't mention his bride was a teenager being held against her will. Please, Maya whispered. I need to get back to my mother. She doesn't know what's really happening. Li Wei stood up suddenly. I can't just walk you out the front gate. My father has too much power in this city. The police won't help. He pays them too well. He thought for a moment. We need evidence of what he's done, not just for you, but for any others. Others? Maya asked. You're not the first young woman my father has acquired, but none stayed long enough for a wedding. They either escaped or… Lei Wei didn't finish the sentence. How can I trust you? Maya asked cautiously. Lei Wei pulled out his phone and showed her pictures of himself at protest rallies. I spent 5 years fighting for human rights in America. I won't let my own father continue this evil. Give me a few days to make a plan. He moved toward the door. Lock this from the inside when I leave. Don't tell anyone we spoke. For the first time in days, Maya felt something like hope. True to his word, Lei Wei returned to Maya's room the next morning. He knocked softly, waiting for her to unlock the door before slipping inside. I brought you this, he said, handing her a small phone. Hide it well. My father's staff search these rooms daily when you're having meals. Maya took the phone with trembling hands. Thank you. But how will this help us? We need evidence, Lei Wei explained, sitting on the edge of the sofa. Without proof, it's just your word against my father's. And in this city, his word is law. Maya nodded, understanding. Mr. Chen's power and money would make it nearly impossible to fight him without solid evidence. What kind of proof do we need? She asked. Everything. Records of payments to your stepfather. Names of others involved. And… Lei Wei hesitated. I think my father isn't working alone. I think there are others. Wealthy men who have done the same thing. Maya's eyes widened. A network? Yes, and if we can expose it, we can bring them all down. Lei Wei's face hardened with determination. My father keeps records of everything in his office. He's too proud to think anyone would dare go against him. They formed a plan. Lei Wei would create distractions to get Maya access to Mr. Chen's office. Maya would use the phone to take pictures of documents and record conversations. They would gather evidence over several days to build a complete case. That afternoon, Lei Wei convinced his father to show him the company's new factory across town. With Mr. Chen gone, Lei Wei had given Maya a key to the office. Heart-pounding, Maya slipped into the large room with its dark wooden desk and walls lined with books. She had only 30 minutes before the household staff would notice her missing. She went straight to the desk, trying drawers until she found one locked. Using a hairpin as Lei Wei had taught her, she managed to open it. Inside was a leather ledger. Maya flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. There were names, dates, and amounts. She recognized her own name with the date she arrived and the amount paid to Raymond. But there were at least 20 other names, all young women between 16 and 20. Next to each name was another name, the buyer. Mr. Chen's name appeared several times, but there were others too. Important men, including a judge, 2 business owners, and even a police chief. Maya quickly took photos of every page. Then she found a folder marked Arrangements containing letters between Mr. Chen and other men discussing acquisitions, as if the girls were property. In another drawer, she found photos of young women, some looking as young as 15, with descriptions like merchandise. Maya felt sick, but kept photographing everything. Just as she was replacing the last folder, she heard voices in the hallway. Quickly, she closed the drawer and slipped behind a large curtain. The door opened. It was Mr. Chen and another man. The girl is perfect, Mr. Chen was saying. Young, beautiful, and easily controlled. Her mother's illness makes her compliant. You always find the best ones, the other man replied. When can I see her? My nephew might be interested. At the dinner party next week, I'm introducing her to our circle. Mr. Chen chuckled. The price will be high, of course. Maya's blood turned cold. Mr. Chen wasn't planning to marry her. He was going to sell her again to the highest bidder. She pressed the record button on the phone as the men continued talking. They discussed other girls, prices, and how to keep authorities from discovering their operation. When they finally left, Maya waited 5 more minutes before rushing back to her room. She found Lei Wei waiting anxiously. I got everything, she whispered, showing him the phone. But it's worse than we thought. Your father is planning to sell me again at a dinner party next week. Lei Wei's face paled. Then we don't have much time. We need to move faster than I planned. Maya nodded, her determination stronger than her fear. What's next? The next 5 days passed in a blur of secret meetings and careful planning. Maya and Li Wei knew they had only one chance to get this right. If they failed, the consequences would be severe. The dinner party is tomorrow night, Li Wei said during their final meeting in Maya's room. Father has invited 12 men, all part of his network. They'll be expecting to see you paraded like merchandise. Maya shuddered but kept her voice steady. Then we leave tonight. Their plan was dangerous but simple. Lei Wei had contacted a journalist friend named Mei from his university days. Mei worked for a national newspaper and specialized in exposing corruption. She had agreed to meet them at a small hotel in the next city, where they would be safe to share their evidence. Are you sure we can trust her? Maya asked. Lei Wei nodded. Maya has been trying to expose corruption in this region for years. She's been looking for exactly this kind of evidence. As darkness fell, Maya packed her small bag. She left behind all the expensive clothes and jewelry Mr. Chen had given her, taking only what was truly hers. Her school books, the notebook filled with her observations, and the photo of her mother. At 11 o'clock, when the house grew quiet, she heard the soft knock they had arranged. Lai Wei entered, dressed in dark clothes, a backpack slung over his shoulder. Ready? He whispered. Maya nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would wake the household. They moved silently through the dark hallways. Lai Wei had disabled the security cameras on their route, but they still had to avoid the night guards. At each corner, they paused, listening carefully before continuing. The most dangerous part came next. Crossing the main hall with its marble floors that echoed every footstep, they removed their shoes, carrying them as they crept forward in their socks. Halfway across, disaster struck. A guard appeared, heading toward the kitchen. Lai Wei pulled Maya behind a large statue just in time. They held their breath as the guard passed within feet of their hiding place. After what felt like hours, he disappeared down another hallway. Finally, they reached the side door that led to the garden. Lai Wei used his key to unlock it, and they slipped outside into the cool night air. The wall by the old oak tree is lowest, Lai Wei whispered. And there's a gardening shed nearby we can use to climb. They crept through the garden, staying in the shadows of trees and bushes. The security lights illuminated the main pathways, but left dark spaces between. They used these shadows as cover, moving slowly toward the western wall. Just as they reached the shed, a security light suddenly blazed to life, triggered by its motion sensor. It froze, exposed in the bright light. A shout came from the direction of the house. Hey, who's there? Run! Lei Wei grabbed Maya's hand, pulling her toward the wall. They dragged the gardening shed's ladder to the wall. Lei Wei helped Maya climb first, then followed quickly. Just as they reached the top, 2 guards rounded the corner, flashlights sweeping the garden. There, on the wall. Maya and Lei Wei didn't wait. They jumped down on the other side, landing hard on the ground below. Maya felt a sharp pain in her ankle but ignored it as they ran toward the road where Lei Wei had parked a motorcycle earlier that day. The guards were at the gate now, trying to unlock it as they shouted into their radios. Maya could hear the mansion's alarm system wailing in the distance. Lei Wei started the motorcycle as Maya climbed on behind him. She wrapped her arms tightly around his waist as they sped away into the night. Behind them, lights were coming on all over the mansion. Mr. Chen would soon discover not only their escape, but also that copies of his secret files were missing. We did it, Maya shouted over the roar of the engine, the wind whipping her hair. Lei Wei nodded, increasing their speed. Now comes the hard part, making sure everyone knows the truth. As they raced toward the highway and the city beyond, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Freedom. 2 years passed like a whirlwind. Maya sat in the bright office of the New Hope Center, looking out the window at women tending the garden below. The small building, once an abandoned school, now served as both a shelter and education center for survivors of trafficking. At 19, Maya had changed in ways she never expected. No longer the frightened girl who had been sold by her stepfather, she now stood tall, her confidence growing with each person she helped. Maya, your mother is here, called Suki, the center's receptionist. Maya smiled and hurried to the entrance. Lila waited there, looking healthier than she had in years. The tuberculosis was finally gone, thanks to proper medical care. She worked at the center now too, teaching cooking skills to the women who stayed there. I brought lunch, Leela said, holding up a basket. You've been working since dawn again, haven't you? Maya laughed. There's so much to do. 2 new girls arrived yesterday. They walked to the small garden where residents often ate lunch. As they spread out their meal under a shady tree, Maya's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lei Wei. Good news. 3 more convictions today, 10-year sentences each. Maya showed the message to her mother. The trial of Mr. Chen's trafficking network had been ongoing for months. So far, 22 people had been convicted, including Mr. Chen himself, who received a 30-year sentence. Raymond, Maya's stepfather, had been one of the first to be sentenced. He would remain in prison for 15 years. Maya had testified at his trial, looking him in the eye as she told the court what he had done. It was the last time she ever wanted to see him. Lei Wei is coming tomorrow, Maya told her mother. He's bringing the lawyer to discuss the foundation. After the scandal broke, Lei Wei had publicly disowned his father and sold his share of the family business. He used the money to create a foundation that supported survivors of trafficking and funded education programs in poor villages, places where girls were most vulnerable to trafficking. Maya worked closely with the foundation, sharing her story at schools and community centers across the country. Her face had become known nationally as a symbol of courage. Miss Maya. A young voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Jia, one of the newest arrivals at the center. Just 16, she had escaped a situation similar to Maya's. Yes, Jia? I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about turning pain into purpose. The girl twisted her hands nervously. I want to help others too. Maybe I could speak with you next time you visit a school. Maya felt warmth spread through her chest. This was why all the struggle had been worthwhile. I'd be honored to have you join me. After lunch, Maya headed to her afternoon class. She taught literacy skills to women who had never had the chance to learn reading and writing. Today, they were working on writing letters, many to family members they hadn't seen in years. As Maya moved around the classroom, helping each woman form her letters, she thought about how much had changed. The New Hope Center now housed 20 women at a time, with more arriving each month as word spread that help was available. May's newspaper articles had sparked a national conversation about trafficking. New laws had been passed, with harsher penalties for traffickers and better protection for victims. Police officers now received special training to recognize and respond to trafficking cases. None of it erased what had happened to Maya and countless others. The nightmares still came sometimes, but each day brought healing, not just for Maya, but for every woman who found shelter at New Hope. That evening, as Maya walked home with her mother to their small apartment near the center, she stopped to watch the sunset. 2 years ago, trapped in Mr. Chen's mansion, she had wondered if she would ever see her mother again or feel free. Now, standing in the golden light with her mother beside her, Maya knew that the greatest revenge against those who had tried to break her wasn't just seeing them punished. It was living well, helping others, and turning her pain into a powerful force for change. What had started with a greedy stepfather's betrayal had ended with something no one could have predicted. A movement that was saving lives and changing laws. And at its center stood Maya, no longer a victim but a leader, her voice growing stronger every day. The small hotel room felt like a palace to Maya after her weeks of captivity. Though basic, with just a bed, desk, and bathroom, it offered something Mr. Chen's luxurious mansion never did: true safety. Mai, the journalist, arrived at dawn. She was younger than Maya expected, perhaps 30, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a notebook already in hand. "Show me everything," she said after brief introductions. For 2 hours, Maya and Lei Wei presented their evidence. The photos of ledgers with names and payments. The recorded conversations. Maya's detailed notes about her own experience. May's expression grew increasingly serious as she examined each piece of evidence. "This is bigger than I imagined," she said finally. "These men, they're some of the most powerful people in the province. Will that be a problem?" Maya asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Mai shook her head firmly. "It makes the story more important, not less. But we need to be careful, very careful." She looked at Lei Wei. "Your father will use every resource to find you both." "I know," Lei Wei said grimly. That's why we need to move quickly. They developed a plan. Mai would take the evidence to her editor and prepare a major expose. Meanwhile, Maya and Li Wei would stay hidden, changing locations every night. What about my mother? Maya asked. Once the story breaks, my stepfather might hurt her. May nodded. I'll send a trusted colleague to your village today. We'll get her to safety before publishing anything. 2 days later, May called with news. My colleague found your mother. She's weak but safe now, staying with my friend's family in another town. Your stepfather is furious, searching everywhere for you. Maya wept with relief. Can I speak to her? Not yet. Phone calls can be traced, but she sent you a message. May's voice softened. She said she loves you and is proud of your courage. Over the next week, May's newspaper prepared their story meticulously, gathering additional evidence and testimonies from other victims who had previously been too afraid to speak out. In that time, Mr. Chen's network had mobilized. Wanted posters with Maya and Lai Wei's faces appeared around the city. Police, paid by Mr. Chen, searched hotels and bus stations. They even announced a kidnapping on local news, claiming Maya had been taken by Lai Wei against her will. They're getting desperate, May said when she visited their latest hiding place. That's good, it means they're scared. On the 8th day after their escape, the story broke. Not just in May's newspaper, but simultaneously in 3 national papers and 2 international news networks. The evidence was too strong and widespread to suppress. The headlines were devastating. Human trafficking ring led by prominent businessmen exposed. Photos of Mr. Chen, the judge, the police chief, and others filled the front pages. The story included testimony from 4 former victims who had come forward, their identities protected but their stories matching Maya's in terrible detail. By evening, the national police had taken over the investigation, bypassing the local corrupt officers. Mr. Chen's mansion was surrounded, search warrants executed. Similar scenes played out at the homes of 12 other men named in the expose. Maya watched it unfold on a small television in their hotel room, hardly believing it was real. They're actually being arrested, she whispered as footage showed Mr. Chen being led away in handcuffs, his face hidden from cameras. That night, the national police chief held a press conference. We have arrested 15 individuals connected to this trafficking network, including prominent businessman Chen Jianguo. We are also seeking Raymond Patel, who sold his stepdaughter into this network. We urge any other victims to come forward. Your safety is guaranteed. Li Wei squeezed Maya's hand. It's happening. They're facing justice. 3 days later, Maya received the news she'd been waiting for. Raymond had been arrested trying to flee the country. The authorities had frozen all his assets, including the money he'd received for selling Maya. Your mother is asking to see you, Mai told her. It's safe now. For the first time in what felt like forever, Maya smiled without fear shadowing her eyes. Justice was finally unfolding, not just for her, but for all the girls who had suffered before her.